Rebecca.
Okay, so we have 4 of the 6 members, so we can start whenever you'd like to start, Councillor Littleton.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to call this meeting to order. We begin this gathering by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous peoples. Okay, now we move to adoption of the agenda. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Councillor Cisco? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dodge? All in favor? Okay, that's carried. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Okay, I don't see any. As a reminder, councillors are required to submit written statements or of declarations to the deputy clerk and councillor coordinator via email. So if anything comes up, you can still do that. Okay, there's no minutes to approve. Chair's report. Councillor Cisco, is there anything that you'd like to mention?
Nothing specific except that there is a small cat that just underwent surgery who I'm trying not to pick up. So if you see a cat wandering past, that's why.
Thank you. And if anyone sees a black streak come in front of my face, that's a cat as well. Okay, motions. There are none. Motions to move reports on consent. The clerk's office has not been notified of any request to pull items from consent. Oh, anything now? Yes, Councillor Cisco?
No, just the motion to move the items on consent, and kudos to staff for the grant report. It's good to see that we're accessing grant monies where they are.
Okay, I don't need a seconder, so thank you. Deputy Clerk, I guess it's to you.
Yes, it is. Thank you. So today's consent agenda includes item 9.1, Financial Management Services 2021 COVID-19 Recovery Funding Update. Item 9.2, Office of the Chief Administrative Officer, Public Engagement for the 2022 Capital and Operating Budgets. Item 9.3, Office of the Chief Administrative Officer, Semi-Annual Grant Update. Councillor Cisco?
Yes.
Councillor Dodge?
Oops. Yes.
Councillor Phillips?
Yes.
Councillor Porter?
Yes.
Mayor Sensic?
Yes.
And Chair Littleton?
Yes,
And that's carried.
thank you. Sorry, I muted myself. Moving on to discussion items, we have 10.1 Financial Management Services Corporate Asset Management Capital Project Report for the fourth quarter ended December 31, 2020. And I'm going to look to the Director of Financial Management, Christine Douglas, to speak to the report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, this is the regular quarterly report that is prepared and presented to BSC. Beyond reporting of the 10 capital projects completed in the fourth quarter of 2020, this report includes reporting on the transfer of capital project dollars to other projects under Delegation Bylaw 2019-63. During 2020, there were 11 budget transfers completed, moving $466,626 between capital projects of the same asset type. 10 were at the director level, which is under $100,000, and there was one at the CAO level, which is over $100,000 but under $250,000. Budget overages in excess of $250,000 are presented to council for their approval. Also included in this report is a recommendation to create 2 capital reserves. The Welland Canal Fallen Workers Memorial Reserve. This reserve is for the maintenance and preservation of the memorial. Project funding through a tri-party agreement with the city, the region, and the federal government, as well as private donors. Donations received exceeded budget, and the city's contribution for the project was fixed under the grant funding requirements. Similar to other assets, there will be future costs to maintain this memorial over its life, which will exceed the cost to build it. Therefore, a portion of the dollars received are recommended by staff to create this reserve to help offset future maintenance and preservation costs and to ensure the donations received for the memorial are used for that purpose. The allocation of $235,000, which is 20% of the asset cost, is being recommended to create this reserve. The second reserve is the Green Initiatives Reserve. The purpose of this reserve is to provide partial funding to the capital projects that incorporate enhanced energy efficient attributes. Intent is to complete capital projects that will generate further incentive rebates as well as energy cost savings, which can replenish this reserve. It will also assist with the implementation of the actions identified in the Conservation Demand Management Plan, which result in ongoing utility savings, operational savings, and one-time incentives. The target balance of this reserve is $350,000, reflects the intent to grow the reserve from the receipt of future rebates and savings. The allocation from 2 capital projects to this reserve at this time is $208,732. Madam Chair, that concludes my introduction to this report.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions? You've all disappeared. I can only see Councillor Cisco and Councillor Porter, so if anyone else has questions, just unmute yourself and ask questions.
I don't see any raised hands.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. Give me
I'll
one.
move to approve, Walter.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a seconder?
Councillor Cisco's put up his hand.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I guess we can move to the vote then.
Mayor Senzik,
Yes.
thank you. Councillor Dodge,
Yes.
Councillor Phillips,
Yes.
Councillor Porter,
Yes.
Councillor Cisco,
Yes.
and Councillor Littleton,
Yes,
and that's carried.
thank you. Okay, we are moving then to 10.2, Financial Management Services. The director is going to give us a 2020 year-end report and reserve update. And again, this will be Christine Douglas to speak to the report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, Madam Chair. This report includes the results of the 2020 fiscal year. 2020 transactions have closed, and numbers are still subject to our annual audit. Figures are only truly finalized once this assessment has been completed. The auditors are scheduled to begin their fieldwork the week of April the 19th. The city ended 2020 in a positive position, mainly due to the cost containment and mitigation efforts of city staff during the year that was plagued with the global pandemic. There is a year-end surplus for 2020 of $1.2 million. Staff are recommending that the 2020 year-end surplus be allocated to 2 reserves. The first is the election reserve in the amount of $550,000. In addition to the existing election reserve balance of $99,000, this allocation is anticipated to be adequate for the 2022 municipal election and will lessen the pressure on the 2022 tax levy budget. The second reserve allocation is to the tax rate stabilization reserve in the amount of $650,000. The city's total expenditure budget for 2020 was 99.21% of the budget once the year is complete, and the non-tax revenues trended unfavorably at 97% of budget. There are a number of factors that contribute to the city's positive year-end position. Details are available in the Appendix 1 of the report. There were staff vacancies in several city departments, and during the year, once the positions are filled, often entrants begin at a lower rate, or in the case of a contract, do not require pension or extended health care benefits. There is also decrease in discretionary spending during 2020. The supplementary tax revenues were $450,000 over budget, and interest income was slightly over budget at $98,000 due to more funds being available for investing in the first quarter of the year. Offsetting these positive variances are the unfavorable variances of the tax appeals and write-offs of $2.7 million. Transfer of the prior year surplus of $1.15 million was not required and remains in the tax rate stabilization reserve to assist with pressures in future years. Penalty and interest on tax being under budget by $791,000, largely due to the 4-month interest grace period and the council approved interest relief and application-based deferral programs in 2020 to assist our taxpayers with the impact of the global pandemic, and also the POA revenues being under budget by $137,000. Overall, our non-tax revenues had an unfavorable variance of $3.5 million. All city departments are involved with the development of the year-end report. Departments were requested to provide comments on any variances that were greater than 10% with the year being complete. Therefore, if the year-end variance was requested for explanations for items that were 90% or were 110% of the annual budget. Details, as indicated, are provided in Appendix 1 to the report. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all of the departments for their hard work and tracking and responding to the numerous requests for data and information during 2020. Your subject matter expertise allowed the finance budget team to analyze the information in a timely manner and recommend the various actions required during 2020 to mitigate and contain costs. To the finance team, your incredible efforts to continue to find creative solutions to the many challenges faced during 2020. You truly excel at teamwork and have proven how much better we are as a group. I want to personally thank each of you for your hard work and dedication during 2020 and continuing this in 2021. I am proud to be a part of your team. As expected, the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the city financially in many ways during 2020. There was lost revenues due to service restrictions. We had facility closures. There was waiving of interest and penalty on our outstanding tax and water accounts. The delay of the annual water and wastewater rate increased for 4 months. We had an increase in expenses related to providing safe and healthy working environment for our staff and for staff and for safe facilities for our citizens during the pandemic. The total financial impact was approximately $395 million, including the revenue shortfall and increased expenses. Mitigation measures included temporary workforce and service reductions, reassignment, and deferred hiring of vacant positions. Facility closures and reduced utility costs, discretionary spending reductions, including travel and education, conferences, postage, and office supplies. Mitigation efforts were a large contributor to the city ending 2020 with a positive financial position. The Safe Restart allocation funding totaled $5.6 million from the upper levels of government, of which $855,000 was allocated to the water and wastewater budgets and $973,000 to the parking services budget, and $3.84 million was allocated to the tax levy operating budget to mitigate the operational pressures of the pandemic. The Safe Restart funding received was fully allocated at the end of 2020 to mitigate the COVID financial impact. Also included in this report are the details of the city's reserve and reserve fund year-end balances. The city has a number of established reserves, capital, contingency, discretionary, and obligatory reserves, and details are included in Appendix 2. Appendix 3 and 4 are the 2020 year-end results for parking, the reserve, and the water and wastewater reserve, respectively, as the year-end results were not available when the operating and the water and wastewater 2020 budgets were approved. Parking services was hit hard by the pandemic, and the 2020 year-end results, with the assistance of the Safe Restart funding, ended the year with a $204,000 deficit, which was better than the $511,000 that we had forecasted. The current uncommitted balance of the parking reserve is $982,000, which includes the 2021 budget commitments. The water and wastewater 2020 year-end results are a surplus of $257,000. And this is a result of the water having a net surplus of $911,000, the wastewater having a deficit of $654,000. The current uncommitted balance of the water and wastewater reserve is $5.6 million, which includes the 2021 budget commitments. The final appendix is a summary of the activity in the Civic Project Fund from 2005 till the end of 2020. The uncommitted balance at December 31st, 2020 is $5.33 million. And when the 2021 budget commitments are considered, the available balance would be $1.76 million. Madam Chair, that concludes my overview of this report.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask a question to the Deputy Clerk? Should we get the motion on the floor first?
Generally, yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Do I have a mover for this motion to get it on the floor? Okay, Councillor Cisco. Is there a seconder?
Councillor Phillips has his hand up.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Phillips, I couldn't see you, so thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so now we'll take questions.
I see Councillor Cisco's hand is up.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Ms. Douglas, just a couple of questions. First, with the election reserve, I know it says that there's going to be a report coming, but the $650,000 target, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's about 55 or 60% more than what was spent on the 2018 budget. Is there any obvious reason as to why the reserve is targeting such a higher amount than we used in 2018?
So through the chair, there is inflation that has increased it a little bit, but the larger thing is that now with COVID and knowing what we know, we are looking at potentially alternative voting methods, or even if we're sticking with the same methods, increasing the number of polls or different space that we need within our polls. We just want to ensure that whatever we do recommend is able to adapt to whatever the public health reality is at the time of the election. So we kind of have to plan with what we know today and hope that things are relaxed by then. But we do anticipate it will be more expensive. Even if it was the exact same as 2018, but we have to use more cleaning, or we have to have somebody at each poll now to clean between voters, for example, that's going to be increased cost for staffing and materials. But we will be reporting to council in the next couple of months with the options and the associated price of each.
Okay, so
COVID and potentially modernization.
Okay, I'll look forward to the report. I'm interested to see what modernization possibilities exist. My other question is just related to the tax rate stabilization reserve, and I think Ms. Douglas is the best person to ask about this. This is fairly specific to the instance of the Downtown Association. I'm going to be asking for staff in a request later on in the meeting to look at possible costs that may be incurred with respect to the opening, the street opening and the pedestrian gateway opening, which will be happening this summer. And I'm hopeful that we may be able to identify some dollars to help with that, to make it less of a, make it more pedestrian welcoming this year, which would require potentially some spending. I've spoken to Mr. York. I believe, Ms. Douglas, you were a part of the email thread just talking about the possibilities. Is it possible that if council sees fit to move forward with spending some money to try and make that road closure possibility more welcoming, and it does require some spending, that we can take it out of the tax rate stabilization reserve? I only ask because we're putting a significant portion of the surplus in that reserve, and I'm hopeful that we may be able to access some of those dollars if council sees fit to put some money into that road opening.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor, with regards to the tax rate stabilization reserve, all reserve funds are available to be utilized with council approval. And as you have indicated, we are recommending the transfer of the $650,000 from the 2020 year end. So that would be sitting in the reserve for utilization. If those dollars are utilized during the year, then they're not there to help with future years, but it is at the discretion of council for them to approve the use of funds in this reserve.
I appreciate that. And I do want, just as a reminder to my colleagues on the committee, I'm hopeful that we can keep an open mind with respect to this. We use the tax rate stabilization reserve as well as the civic project fund this past year to work with one-time costs related to COVID. And I think that was the right strategy to help taxpayers. This will be another one-time cost, at least initially, to help commercial taxpayers and residential taxpayers with the opportunity to open up the downtown to pedestrian traffic. So I'm hopeful that there will be an open mind towards using some of those dollars from the surplus that will be put in the tax rate stabilization reserve for now. But hopefully, like I said, an open mind to the possibility of using that to be able to help those businesses and make the downtown a little bit more welcoming during those pedestrian gateway periods this summer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have Councillor Dodge next.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I think to Ms. Douglas, it's nice to see all the details in this report, and I thank you very much for that. And I can see in the report in 2020, we did defer the water wastewater rate, and I'm just wondering if we could do this for 2021. And I know that Council's already passed the increase, but now that we have the facts and figures, I'm wondering if this would be an option.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor. I will share some information, and then with regards to considering a rate that is approved by council, I will defer to this to the deputy clerk. But with regards to the water and wastewater rate, in 2021, staff looked at ways to mitigate the water rate increase with the deferral of capital projects, and the end result was a water and wastewater increase on the average residential homeowner of 1.86%. From in staff's opinion, that is a very reasonable rate, especially when we consider two factors. One being the fact that about 67% of the city's water and wastewater budget dollars are collected in order for us to pay to the region our wastewater charges, as well as to purchase water. The other item with regards to the rate increase for 2021, when the water and wastewater financial plan was presented to council, it had indicated that a target rate would be a rate that was under 6%. And I believe that with the deferral of capital projects that happened in the 2021 budget, those projects will need to come back online. And it is my opinion that not having an increase or deferring the 2020 rate increase is not a fiscal sustainable option, because of our infrastructure gap, because of the deferral of capital projects that will need to come online, I believe that it is the most responsible thing to do to continue with the proposed rate increase that has been approved by council. And also, because the rate was effective March 1st, we have started to bill customers at the 2021 rate as well.
Thank you very much for the update, and thank you for the thorough report.
Councillor Dodge, did you have any further questions?
No, Madam Chair, I don't. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions?
I just have a quick question to the chair,
ahead.
to Director Douglas. In terms of the hydro, so there was a hydro fund that's listed in here. The projected amount, if I'm reading this correctly, for 2020 is I gotta get to the file, about 300,000. Speaking just about the hydro fund.
So through you, Madam Chair, to the Mayor, with regards to the Hydro Reserve Fund, the Hydro Reserve Fund is a reserve fund where when the situation allows within the city's budget and when the city receives dividend in interest income greater than budget, those additional funds can be transferred to the Hydro Reserve, and then those funds can be used in future years to assist with capital related or operating budgets items that have a capital or a somewhat of a link to hydro. So at the end of the year, the Hydro Reserve Fund has an uncommitted balance of 402,000, and that is inclusive of the transfers that were made into the 2021 operating budget.
Okay, so just bear with me for a second. So in 2020, we, as a municipality, the dividend payments from Haywood was 166,000.
Madam, through the chair to Mr. Mayor, there was 166,000 and a special dividend of 51,000. Yes.
So that was 2020.
Through the Mayor, through Madam Chair to the Mayor, those were the amounts that were received in 2020. Yes.
I know, because there's information out there, I guess, through the chair, there's information out there that, you know, the Haywood station has generated 350,000+ in revenues. And so we have a report in front of us that it was 166 with a special dividend. And then there's indications that these dividends will go up year over year, but we're not really seeing that when it comes to the actual report in front of us, and that's a concern. Now there's 400,000 that's in a hydro reserve. Is that the only amount that's left in that hydro reserve, or is that unaccounted for or unallocated? Is that an unallocated amount?
Through Madam Chair to the Mayor, the uncommitted balance, yes, of the Hydro Reserve Fund is the 402,000.
Through the chair, thank you. So when you say it's uncommitted, what's the definition of that? So is that monies that the hydro board, and well, there's two councillors plus there's just three councillors on the board. Like, is that for capital projects that Haywood is in need of? I think we're looking at about a $9 million retrofitting at Haywood, which is going to drop our dividends down pretty extensively. Is that 402 for those projects or no?
Through the chair to the Mayor, that reserve is a city reserve. So the work that would need to be done at Haywood, that would be dollars that would need to be paid by Hydro themselves. So the 402 are dollars that have flowed to the city, and they are for the city to use how council sees fit with regards to those dollars. Okay,
so through the chair, probably my last question. Has that 402, is that included in your allocation in the beginning motion? Is that inclusive of all of the 1.2 million? Is that inclusive in that?
Through the chair to the Mayor, yes, the allocation has already been made to the hydro reserve. The remaining surplus that is unallocated at the end of the year is the 1.2 million, and our recommendation is the as shown in the report and on the screen at this time, the 650,000 to the tax rate stabilization reserve and the 550 to the election reserve.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm going to ask it in a different way. So the 402,000, which as of December 31st is uncommitted balance in the hydro reserve, is that, so you're telling, and I just need clarification, so that 402,000 is also, that's included in the 1.2 million. So when we talk about the year-end surplus for the city of St. Catharines, the 1.2 million is inclusive of the 402 unallocated hydro reserve.
Through the chair to the mayor, no,
Okay, that's on you.
Okay.
It's not, and because that was the confusing part of the
Yeah.
previous question, is that it's actually not. So it hasn't been allocated yet.
Yeah.
So unless it has, but in the writing of the report, it hasn't been allocated.
Through the chair to Mr. Mayor, yes, the dollars have been allocated to the hydro reserve, and that is reflective in the year-end surplus position. The uncommitted part of the wording in the report, that means that the dollars are sitting there in the reserve and there is no commitment against it. There's no capital work or anything that the city has approved to use those dollars for. Those would be $402,000 that council could use for something should they want to use those reserve dollars. They uncommitted meaning available for use.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's confusing, but through the chair, I would just like to make a motion that we also deal with that at the and I think Councillor Cisco touched on it as well. Like I think we've left that 402 out there long enough. I think there needs to be a discussion about it at some point. So I'm at the will of the committee. We can either allocate it now and say, it'll be part of something, or I'm just trying to, it shouldn't sit out there any longer is what I'm saying. I think with Councillor Cisco's comments about something that we need to do this year, we do have an additional fund, if you will, that can help finance some things. So I'm just putting it on the radar now. I don't think I need to add it as part of a motion, but I guess to the budget chair and vice chair, I think that needs to be dealt with in a certain time frame between now and say May. But I'll leave it to the chair and vice chair to figure that out.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure we can find some suggestions for it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Did you have any further questions?
Nope.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? No? Okay, I have a question. I just wanted to ask the Director of Finance, we're talking about the Civic Project Fund. It says the targeted balance in the reserve is $75.2 million, but we have $1 million. Is that right? Because I always talk about us raiding the piggy bank. So we've done that, and I understand that we did it for COVID, but is that what I'm reading? That we've basically taken out everything, and but we should have a balance of $75 million in there. Am I reading that right?
To the chair, the target balance is the balance that is recommended based on a percentage of the city's total assets. So that balance does fluctuate as the city's assets do fluctuate, and it is extremely high. However, with all of the reserve funds, when we look at them, the city, for a number of them, the city is not at the target level, but it's good financial practice to have that target balance available, so that when should there be an influx of cash, then we're able to make determinations of what reserve funds are in need of funding, which reserve and in more need than the other. And I'm not sure that we would ever be in a position that we would hit that target, but it does allow us to allocate into the reserve should we have the cash available to us, and be able to do it based on when we look at our asset values and ensure that we spread the dollars available across the various reserve funds that the city does have.
Just a follow-up question. Is it at all concerning? Like, does it concern you when you look at the city's balance sheets that it's so low?
Through the chair, to the chair, with regards to the balance of the Civic Project Fund, when we look at, the original balance of the Civic Project Fund, and that, the initial influx was fairly significant. It was about $37 million, and it has been used. There's been a number of capital works, like about 31 million has went to improvements within the city's downtown. I would say that any financial expert would always rather have more dollars in our reserves. But I think one of the things that we saw through out the past year with regards to COVID, the importance of us having our reserves and being cautious in how we use those reserves, and them being available for us. I would say the other item with regards to the Civic Project Fund is that we do have like an internal loan that is still being repaid. So although the available balance is only the 1.76 million, we do have an outstanding repayment happening of approximately 5.7 million. So those will be flowing into the reserve as that debt does get repaid, because we did an internal financing for our Seymour Hanna facility a number of years ago. So I do say that the reserve balance is getting low, and we are cautious. We did minimize our amount of transfers into the operating budget for 2020. If we didn't need to transfer the dollars in and we were able to mitigate, we manage that, and staff will always be cautious of how the reserves balance is being utilized. But at the end of the day, I would say that it is getting a bit lower than I think that kind of the comfort of seeing it around closer to the $4 or $5 million range is something that I think we would put us healthier. But I would have to say that a large part too of us needing to utilize that reserve fund in during the 2021 operating budget, is one of the primary reasons that it has declined. So provided things continue improving over the year, then we won't have that, hopefully don't have the same need in 2022 budget to need to be utilizing our reserves. I would not want to see this drop significantly more than where we are currently at. I think we need at least that the balance that's there for unforeseen things.
Okay, thank you. I see Councillor Cisco's hand. I just have one last question. I did want to ask about, we do note it in here about the Seymour Hanna Center. I'm not trying to be at all not sympathetic or anything here. I'm thrilled that we have the facility that is being able to use for vaccinations. I'm just wondering, is there any type of agreement that the facility is being rented, or is that being worked out? Is there any possibility that the city will receive some dollars for the use of that facility?
Through the chair and to the chair, with regards to the utilization of Seymour Hanna as a vaccination site, it is currently, the city has an agreement with the Niagara Health System to utilize it as a vaccination site. We are not exactly sure of the end date, but the facility is available to Niagara Health as long as they need it. We do have an agreement where they are reimbursing a number of the incremental costs that have been incurred or are being incurred for the city. We are also separately tracking all of these costs so that we are aware if there's any additional funding that may become available, then we could apply for that to offset our costs. With regards to the facility itself, currently with the operation of the vaccination site, Rink 1 and 4 are the sites that are being utilized for that. We are able to utilize Rink 2 and 3 for our programming, and at this time we're optimistic that although it is limited in the red, that will continue continue for the remainder of the year. With regards to use of the vaccination site by public health, there are still discussions ongoing, and but the city is supportive and willing to provide Seymour Hannah to Niagara Public Health should Niagara Health Systems need wrap up.
Thank you. Councillor Cisco?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly on the Civic Project Fund, and I was glad that the director pointed out the $5.7 million that is still to be repaid for the Seymour Hannah loan. I think it's important that everybody recognizes that money will be paid back into that fund. But additionally, and I think it's important to note, Council has the ability at any time to direct funds towards the Civic Project Fund in the instance of things like special dividends, etc. So we always have that capacity. And it's something we talked about a little bit in the fall when we were debating the use of the Civic Project Fund, is that we may need to be more aggressive going forward. I will say $75 million in the Civic Project Fund is what I think governments would term a stretch goal. I don't know if it's ever likely that we would get to that point, and I don't know if we'd necessarily be able to justify to residents holding that large of a reserve. But there are opportunities that exist, and it's something that I think needs to be on the radar for not just this council, but the next council as well. That the point was made, I know by myself, by the mayor, that we did a good job in the decade before this past year in not raiding those reserves, in holding off and making sure that there were dollars available for when something bad hit, which is exactly what we've experienced. So I think that the job of this council, at least for the rest of the term, is to start looking at ways to rebuild that reserve so that if something comes additionally in the future, that we're prepared for it the way we were this time.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to your team, Ms. Douglas. You obviously last year was a very difficult one, constantly pivoting, coming to budget committee all the time saying, this is what we're looking at. We're not sure, but we think this, we're projecting that. That's not an easy thing to do. And you and your team did an excellent job. So thank you for all the hard work that was done. Seeing no other hands, I think we are going to call the question.
Through the chair, Councillor Cisco,
Yes.
Councillor Phillips,
Yes.
Councillor Porter,
Yes.
Councillor Dodge,
Yes.
Mayor Senzik, he's got a thumbs up, and Councillor Littleton,
Yes.
and that's carried.
Okay, thank you. There's no in-camera session, so we have no motions arising from in-camera. Report requests. Okay, number 13.1. The following report request was submitted to the Office of the Clerk. So Councillor Cisco, would you like to tell us about your report request? Thank you.
Happy to, and I will say I have another report request and then hopefully 2 more directions to staff. I don't know if they necessarily need to be reports. The first one came out of the financial sustainability pillar. Just a request for a staff report looking at the costs for the City of St. Catharines to undertake sidewalk snow clearing throughout the city, as well as only in the downtown or high pedestrian routes. This came out of, I want to say the Active Transportation Committee, but someone who was there can correct me if I'm wrong. But it was a request from a citizen advisory committee that we look at this. And it's something I know it's been on my radar. I know Councillor Porter has dealt with requests and is a similar mindset that this is something that we at least need to have the costing on. And I believe Councillor Dodge may have an addition to this as well for other areas to be looked at, but I'll leave that to her. But I would hope that the budget committee would be willing to support this so we can get that information and make it a part of our budget deliberations for this year.
Okay, thank you. And I don't think we have a debate on this because it's a report request. Great. So can I have a show of hands? Or
actually, Chair, I believe Councillor Dodge wants to add.
Oh, I apologize. Councillor Dodge?
That's okay. Sorry, I couldn't get my mute off quick enough. I I'm totally supportive of this. I'm just wondering if we could be more specific and possibly if we can't do the whole city, which would be the thing that, would be most desirable, but also like include Merton, their like downtown area and the Port Dalhousie area as well, or anything that is representative of a little, commercial area sort of thing. Sort of area.
Okay, excellent.
And I don't know if Councillor Cisco thinks that's friendly.
Definitely friendly.
Okay, thank you. So I guess a show of hands now. Okay, excellent. And you said you had another one, Councillor Cisco?
Yes, Chair. The second one is a request for a report, and this is targeting Q1 of 2022. It's not for this tax year because I know staff have a lot of other things that are happening, especially with COVID. But looking at the idea of an older adults tax differential deferral program. It's a discussion that I've had with Ms. Douglas and some of her staff, and just looking at what's available, what currently exists, and what's possible. I know that this would also include, conversations with the region. So as I said, it's something I'm hoping for a report back in the first quarter of next year.
Okay, I can see your little hands if you raise them at the side, but I don't see any. So I'm going to assume that nobody has their hands raised for questions. Okay, so again, by a show of hands for that report. Thank you. That's carried.
And then two, I think, directions, just with respect to the Downtown Association. Councillor Porter and I and the mayor have all been involved with the discussions currently ongoing. So just a direction of staff with the COVID-19 report that's coming to council next week, that any costing that may be available for the downtown street closures be identified as a part of that report, or an addendum or a memo, whatever the case may be, whatever makes the most sense for staff. That's the first one. And then the second one was with respect to the YMCA closure. I've been contacted, and I know a number of councillors have been contacted by residents. And this may actually be better as a report, but I don't know how timely that could be put together. But just looking at the financial implications of possible partnerships with the YMCA, and this would likely have to come through council. So I don't even know if it necessarily would come back to the budget committee, but perhaps just go straight to council. But as I said, it's something I know that a number of councillors are receiving the same phone calls that I'm receiving. So if that's better as a report request, I'm happy to make it a report request, Chair. But the first one, I think, is just a direction to staff.
Deputy Clerk, do you think that should be a report request?
For the item, through the chair, through the item for the YMCA, given its scope, I would suggest perhaps connecting with a member of staff on that if you haven't already. It might be best suited for a report request for council. If so, we can help facilitate that for the next meeting. And if not, then we would just take it as direction.
Okay, so I will touch base with, I'm guessing Mr. Christie would be the best choice. And if it looks like it needs to be a report request, then I can bring that to council on Monday.
Okay, thank you. Do we need a show of hands for these? No. Okay. Excellent. Are there any other report requests?
Through the chair, report request. It looks like there's a new member on staff that's joining the budget committee. Maybe a report about Sebastian Zulakowski. I've never seen his name here, so maybe a brief report on Sebastian. Show of hands.
Where is he?
Sebastian, this is your
Hi,
cue to say
Sebastian.
hi.
You just might recognize him with the mustache.
Yeah.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, if we're going to have a report request on Sebastian, I'd also like one on, it indicates it's Jacob Letta, but it looks like Conor McGregor in the bottom corner of my screen. So I don't know when Conor McGregor joined city staff, but I would love a report request on that as well.
That's a good one. That's actually good. Well, welcome, Jacob. I know I've known Jacob, but I've never met Sebastian. So I apologize if you've been around for a while. I just haven't seen you there before. You stay on mute if you want, though.
It's nice to meet you too, Bear.
All done.
Okay, great. So now we're at number 14, adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Councilor Porter, second Councilor Cisco. All in favor?